William Ackworth Committee. This tradition continued for 92 long years. However, since 2017, the Union Budget is presented as a composite budget with provisions for railways therein. Year 1919 saw a sea change in the scheme of budget in India. The Government of India Act of 1919 for the first time authorized provincial legislatures to enact their own budgets. Owing to this tectonic shift, state governments and union territories, Council of Ministers like Delhi and Puducherry and of late even Jammu Kashmir have been enacting their own provincial budgets. In conclusion, one can fittingly argue that the scheme of budget in contemporary India is a rich legacy of the British, which has not only stood the test of time but has emerged as a central pillar of India's democracy in financial affairs of the Union government. However, a few questions must be answered. What then is budget? Who enacts it and how is it passed in the parliament? To find answers to these questions, we must turn towards the Constitution of India. The Constitution under Part 5, Article 112 refers to the budget as annual financial statement. In other words, the term budget has nowhere been used in the Constitution. The budget is a statement of estimated receipts and expenditure of the Government of India in a financial year which begins on April 1 and ends on March 31st of the following year. The budget document is fairly complex and fiercely technical in nature. The budget making process starts in August or September, that is about 6 months prior to its date of presentation. Its enactment is undertaken by the Budget Division of the Department of Economic Affairs in the Finance Ministry with consultations of the Niti Aayog. At this point, we need to disintegrate the scheme of budget into two stages. One, the enactment stage, and two, the presentation stage. The enactment stage itself comprises of 5 substages. The first substage is issuance of circulars to all ministers, states, union territories, autonomous bodies, and so on by the Finance Ministry, asking them to prepare estimates for the coming year. Apart from providing their estimates, the ministries also give details of their revenues and expenditures in the past year. The second substage includes wide consultations by senior government officials on proposals received from various ministries. They scrutinize demands and upon approval, a compilation is sent to the Finance Ministry. The third substage is concerned with actual allocation of revenues by the Finance Ministry for future expenditures. The Finance Ministry can hold consultations with relevant stakeholders for its own understanding before finalizing allotments, and in case dispute arises over the allotment of funds, the Finance Ministry consults the Union Cabinet or the Prime Minister. The fourth substage is a continuation of the third substage. We can call this stage as pre-budget meeting. It is possible that disputes over allocation could not be resolved at the ministry level or in the Union Cabinet. Thus, the ministry conducts a pre-budget consultation and takes the final call on all demands with the approval of the Prime Minister. The fifth and the final substage in budget enactment is budget printing. Every year, the government follows an annual tradition of hosting Halwa ceremony. Yes, you heard it right, an annual tradition of hosting Halwa ceremony to mark the beginning of printing final draft of the budget document. With this, we come to an end of the first stage of the budget scheme. The second stage of the budget scheme is a little complex as we need to now understand the role of Parliament in budget enactments. The budget is presented before the Parliament through a special session of the Parliament known as the budget session. It is the lengthiest of the 3 sessions and it is conducted from the month of February to May. This stage comprises of 6 substages. The first substage is presentation of the budget by the Finance Minister in the Lok Sabha. The speech delivered by the Finance Minister is called as a budget speech. Conventionally, the budget is presented on the first working day of February. The budget document includes budget speech, budget summary, demand for grants, finance and appropriation bill, statements mandated under the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, and policy programs of the government. At this point, it is important to note two important things. Number one, the budget speech is delivered only and only in the Lok Sabha, and copies of the speech are laid down in the Rajya Sabha. And number two, no discussion on the budget speech is undertaken immediately after the speech has been delivered. Subsequently, the House is adjourned for a few days before beginning with the second substage. The second substage is marked with general discussion on the budget. Although the budget speech is delivered only in the Lok Sabha, it can be discussed by both the houses. However, we must note two important things about this substage. One, only principles of the budget are discussed. It is not an in-depth discussion on the budget provisions, and thus no voting happens on the demands made by the government. Number two, the finance minister has a general right of reply at the end of the discussion. The third substage of the budget enactment is marked by the scrutiny undertaken by departmentally related standing committees. As such, there are 24 departmentally related standing committees, and their duties include in-depth examination of demands of various ministries and departments and preparation of separate reports on those grants. The third substage takes about 4 to 5 weeks to complete scrutiny, and in the meantime, both the houses remain adjourned. The fourth substage is perhaps the most important stage in the entire budget scheme. It is marked by voting on demand for grants. A demand is the request placed by the government before the parliament to accept its expenditure proposal. If the demand is approved by the parliament through voting, then it becomes a grant. However, there are three critical aspects to this stage. Number one, voting on demand for grants is an exclusive privilege of the Lok Sabha. In other words, the Rajya Sabha does not participate in voting on demand for grants. Number two, only votable parts of the budget are put to vote. Expenditure marked as charged on the Consolidated Fund of India are not submitted for voting, although they can be discussed. Now, what qualifies as charged expenditure? It includes salaries of the President, Vice President, judges of the Supreme Court and the High Court, and such dignitaries who hold the seat of a constitutional office, such as Comptroller and Auditor General of India. And number three, members can introduce what is called as cut motions. When private members believe that there is no economy in the demands of the government, they may introduce one of the three cut motions. One, policy cut motion, which means that the cut motion will actually reduce the government demand to just rupees 1. Two, economic cut motion, which means that the amount of the demand be reduced by a lump sum amount. And three, token cut motion, which means that the amount of the demand be reduced by rupees 100. So three cut motions can be introduced. Who will introduce them? Private members. However, there is no practical utility of cut motions. They are only discussed or moved. Since the government enjoys majority in the Lok Sabha, their passage is impossible. In case cut motions are approved and passed, that would result in the defeat of the government, and subsequently the Council of Ministers will have to render their resignations. Therefore, there is no practical utility of cut motions, but they can be moved, introduced and discussed. The fifth substage is the introduction of appropriation bill. The appropriation bill deals with the expenditure part of the budget. Its passage and approval by the President will authorize the government to withdraw finances from the Consolidated Fund of India. However, it takes time until the appropriation bill is presented. The government needs to expedite since the beginning of April 1. With the appropriation bill not yet introduced or passed in the parliament, such a mechanism is bound to present challenges to the government. Thus, a system of vote on account has been devised in which 1/6 of the total expenditures are approved by the parliament. Immediately in the second substage, which is known as general discussion to meet government expenditures for the month of April and May. The final substage is the introduction of the finance bill. The finance bill deals with the revenue part of the budget. Its passage by the parliament and approval by the president will authorize the government to exercise its tax proposals. On a whole, the budget making procedure is as interesting and as demanding as it is challenging. With this, I conclude my session and invite your questions if any. Thank you very much. I'm waiting for the questions from the audience. So if there are any questions, you can just type them out. Could you briefly state the stages and substages again? All right. So there are two stages, and between those two stages, there are multiple substages. The first aspect of budget is to draft a budget, which is known as enacting a budget. That is the first stage. Now, how does the enaction happens? So the enactment of the budget takes about 5 different substages. The first stage is the finance ministry will send out a letter to different ministries, different state governments, different public corporations, and it will ask for their demands. What are their future expenditures? What have they done with their past revenues? Are there any sources of their own? That will be the first substage. The second substage would be consultation process. In a way, consultation simply means that different departments, different ministries, different governments will send their demands to the finance ministry. So the finance ministry will have a number of experts. They will look into each of those demands, and they will consult within themselves and try to come out with the economy of those demands. If they believe that a particular demand must not have been raised, they'll go to that particular government, to that particular department, ministry, call their officials, and they'll talk to them. That is one aspect. That marks the second substage. The third substage is compilation of data. So they'll compile a data, send it to the ministry. The finance minister will then undergo a lot of consultations with other ministers within the government. Now, the problem is there could be an area where a particular ministry could be looking for more finances. There could be an area where a particular ministry could be looking for more grants. So what do we do? So that conflict must be resolved. So the finance minister can either take that issue or dispute with the union government, with the union cabinet, or with the prime minister himself. And after that comes the final stage, which is printing. But before printing, it is the duty and the prerogative of the finance minister to give a final call on what needs to be allocated to which ministry, which department, and how much. So this is about the enactment, after which the budget is printed. The next stage is the stage of passing the budget, getting it approved by the parliament. So again, in the second stage, there are about 5 to 6 different stages. The first stage is to present the budget. That budget presentation process is called as a budget speech. The finance minister will come to the Lok Sabha and deliver a speech. That speech is called as a budget speech. And since it's an annual financial statement, it will have a number of different documents. That is the first substage. The second substage is to discuss the budget summary in brief. That happens after about a week's time and goes on for about a week. The budget is not discussed. Only the principles of the budget and the objectives of the budget are discussed, and that document in which all the principles and objectives of the budget are enlisted are known as budget summary. So that marks the second substage. The third substage is a substage in which 24 different departmentally related standing committees will scrutinize each and every demand of the government. Let's say, for example, you have a Ministry of Education and we have allocated rupees 100 to Ministry of Education. Now, when rupees 100 has been allocated to a particular ministry, within that ministry there are number of different departments. Let's say, for example, primary education, you have allocated 25 rupees. Then there could be X, Y, Z such departments, and they will have their own respective allocations. So it will be the duty of the departmentally related standing committees, which will comprise of experts as well as members of parliament who have a proper formal qualificational or professional background in economics, to scrutinize that particular grant. And then separate reports are prepared, and this entire stage will take about 4 to 5 weeks of time. Then those reports are placed before the Lok Sabha. In the Lok Sabha, the fourth substage will now begin on the basis of the reports which have been prepared and drafted by the departmentally related standing committees. Based on those reports, the members will now carefully and make an in-depth examination of what the budget actually is. In that process, if they believe that, let's say for example, we took the example of HRD ministry, 100 rupees have been allocated, of which 25 rupees will be given to primary education. Let's say for example, a private member believes that 25 rupees is too much of expenditure for primary education. Rather, it should be cut down to, let's say, XYZ amount. It could be anything, 19, 18, 17, anything. So he has the option of doing so. So what can he do? So he'll actually move a motion, and that motion is known as cut motion. While moving the motion, he will have to specify what kind of motion is that. So it could be a policy cut motion, in which he might argue that a particular policy is not good and therefore does not deserve to be allocated so and so much amount of money. The second could be token cut motion. So the demand would be reduced by rupees 100. Let's say for example, let's take primary education as an example, and if the ministry has allocated rupees 500 for primary education, and the minister and a private member introduces a token cut motion, so what it means is the demand of rupees 500 does not have economy in it and therefore should be reduced by rupees 100. So his demand, so he is willing to give 400 rupees but not more than that. That is one cut motion. Second is policy cut motion. You can propose a lump sum amount. Let's say for example, he believes that instead of 500 I need to allocate only 100 rupees. So even that could be done. So that is known as policy cut motion. And the third cut motion is one in which altogether you wish to scrap a particular demand and you only allocate rupees 1. So you scrap that particular demand and only rupees 1 is given to the government. Because if you don't give that rupees 1, what it means is the Lok Sabha does not have the confidence in the government, and therefore the government will have to tender its resignation. But since for all practical purpose the government has a majority, cut motions are never passed. They are introduced, they are moved and discussed, but they are never passed. So that ends the fourth substage. The fifth substage is to pass the expenditure part of the budget, and that expenditure part is introduced through a bill. That bill is known as appropriation bill. In the appropriation bill, what usually happens is the government will make a summary of all the total allocations to the ministries, departments, state governments to different policy programs, and it will simply summarize those and move a bill. It will be the prerogative of the parliament to move that bill, and once the bill has been moved and once it has been voted, it will be brought before the president. The president will have to give his assent, and once the assent has been given, appropriation bill becomes appropriation act. When the bill becomes an act, what it means is the government can now withdraw money in order to facilitate the expenditure. So basically it is the confirmation given by the parliament, it is the authority given by the parliament to the government to make its expenditure. And the final substage is the enactment of what is known as the finance bill. Finance bill are basically tax proposals. So as I have said, budget is basically a statement of receipts and expenditure. Through appropriation bill, you have taken care of the expenditure part, but what about the receipts? So for that, a finance bill is moved. And when a finance bill is moved, the government is basically asking for the permission of the Parliament of India to ensure and exercise its tax proposals. So there could be a proposal of a new tax, there could be a proposal of altogether discarding a particular tax, there could be a proposal of reducing a tax rate, there could be a proposal of increasing taxes, and so on and so forth. So all those tax related aspects of the government through which revenue can be generated is moved into the parliament by the government through the finance minister in the form of a bill called as the finance bill. Again, the parliament will have to vote on it, get it passed, send it to the president. The president must give his assent finance bill then becomes a finance act, and that whole thing, basically the approval of the expenditure through the appropriation act and the approval of the revenue sources through the finance act, means that the budget process has been completed, and that is what it means to pass the entire budget. Now, as I have stated very earlier, the entire process takes about 4 months of time. It starts in the month of February, goes into March, then April, and then May. However, we must all be very cautious of the fact that in India, finance year begins on 1st of April and ends on 31st of May in the subsequent year. So what does the government do when it hasn't passed the budget yet, but needs to do its expenditure on the programs which it had already specified on the very first working day of February? So for that it needs money, right? And the budget is yet not passed, but you have spent 2 months, which is April and May. So what do you do about this? How do you cope up with this situation? So there is a particular aspect, and that aspect is known as vote on account. So after the general discussion, the parliament approves 1/6 of the total budget. Why 1/6? Because there are 12 different months, and for 2 months you need money to expedite your processes. Therefore, the entire budget amount is divided into 6 equal parts, and 1/6 of the budget is approved right after the general discussion. And that has to be done, otherwise there could be complications and it could have ramifications for the entire economy as a whole. And therefore, these are some of the reasons, and that is how the entire process can be summed up. I hope I have made myself clear on this. Now, I'll just take care of the other questions. I can see some of the questions flying here. Sir, are there any examples of disapproval of cut motion in the past? Okay, so are there any examples of disapproval of cut motions? Well, cut motions are moved, they are introduced by private members. The government enjoys majority in the parliament. And when I say parliament, what I specifically mean is in the Lok Sabha. Because the government or the council of minister is collectively responsible only and only to the Lok Sabha. When it loses its majority, when the Lok Sabha loses its confidence in the government will have to resign, which means that the government has been defeated and elections would take up. Now the question is, are there any examples of disapproval of policy cut motion? Well, there have been number of instances, and every year people introduce different types of cut motions, be it policy cut motion, be it token cut motion, or be it any other kind of motion. So the cut motions are introduced, but they are never passed. Why? Because the government enjoys majority, and if they are passed, what it means is the government has lost its confidence. The Lok Sabha has lost its confidence in the government, and it would require the government to resign immediately. Therefore, there are number of instances, and almost every year policy cut motions or economic cut motions or token cut motions are introduced. So citing one or two singular examples would do a lot of injustice, because every year those motions are passed. And I must say this with a great deal of confidence, since we are not already in the month of April or May. So I won't be able to give an example if that would happen, or I won't be able to say with some amount of confidence if that would happen this year. But chances are 99.99% that members from the opposition will definitely move one or the other kind of a cut motion. So that does happen, and it happens every year. Then, can the opposition object to the classification of any bill as a money bill? Yes, anybody can actually raise an objection. But whether a bill is a money bill or not is to be decided only and only by the Speaker of the Lok Sabha, and that cannot be challenged. Now, what is a money bill? The Constitution under Part 5, Article 110, Article 110 clearly gives a list of what constitutes as a money bill. So based on those provisions, which basically more or less deal with expenditures or revenues or auditing of the Consolidated Fund of India, the Public Account of India, and the Contingency Fund of India, are all included. So there is an elaborate list under Article 110. When a particular bill has been moved, the objections can be raised by the opposition as to this particular bill is not a money bill. That happened with the Aadhaar bill, but the Speaker decided in favor of the government. He thought that the bill was a money bill, and then the case went into the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court also gave the same judgment that nobody can challenge the authority of the speaker to decide whether a particular bill is a money bill or not. And how does the speaker decide it? The Constitution of India under Article 110 has elaborated on what constitutes a money bill. So yes, opposition can raise objections. The final authority or the final say will come from the Speaker of the Lok Sabha, although that can be challenged. If something is very controversial in the budget and it needs to be opposed, and since the government enjoys majority in the Lok Sabha, what are the remedies? To begin with, there are two aspects to this question. Number one, can you introduce something controversial in the budget? Then the answer to this question is twofold. Number one, yes, you can introduce something which can be very controversial. For example, in this year's budget, not discussing something has become a more of a controversy. For example, there is not a single word in the budget speech given by the finance minister or in the address of the president, since the president is mandated by the constitution to make his address to both the houses in the first session of the financial year. So that is usually the first session is usually the budget session. Therefore he comes to the parliament and gives an address to the joint session, although that cannot be called a joint session. But the point is, foreign policy was not mentioned in the budget speech by the finance minister. Foreign policy was not mentioned in the speech delivered by the President of India. Foreign policy was not stressed upon even by the External Affairs Minister. And basically the government altogether ignored it. So that is how controversies can be created by the government as well. So that is one way of looking at it, that you don't do a particular thing and that could also become controversial. The other aspect is to include a particular thing. Say for example, the farm bills are very much in the news of late. The 3 farm bills. Now, regardless of what we think, whether they are good, bad or ugly, the point is the speech delivered to the joints to the 2 houses by the President of India has actually praised the efforts of the government to introduce reforms in the farm sector. Now, who writes the speech of the President of India? It is the Government of India. So Government of India means who? Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. The President simply reads out the speech. Therefore, including a particular controversial aspect which has been heavily criticized in the civil society, 2 can be moved, and not taking a particular decision and not including a particular aspect in the budget, 2 can become controversial. So that is one aspect. Now, can the opposition oppose it? Well, of course the opposition can oppose it. And the other aspect of this question is, what are the remedies? The only remedy possible is to move away from the budget, because at the end of the day, budget is a statement of receipts and expenditure, and where is the government going to expedite that those receipts? On different policy programs. So the government may say that this year we wish to introduce scheme XYZ, but all we now know is there is going to be a scheme XYZ to be implemented in financial year 2021-2022, and it will be allocated, let's say, amount ABC. Apart from that, we do not know anything else. So the government will have to frame rules for implementation of that scheme, and in order to facilitate its implementation, the government must frame rules in less than 6 months. So after the rules come out, it is only and only then that that particular scheme can be discussed in the parliament. Until then, there is no remedy. Since there are no rules coming out from the government immediately, the opposition basically more or less is clueless about what that scheme is going to be. They only know the objectives, beyond which there is really nothing that the opposition can do about what they are actually wishing for. So that is, I believe I've addressed 2 aspects in the first part, which is if something is controversial in the budget, and then I have moved on to the remedy aspect as well. So I think I have elaborated on this question as well. Then yes, does the budget 2021 solve the problem of unemployment? Well, see, the aspect of budget basically is distribution of, or equitable distribution of, primary social goods. Now, what I mean by primary social goods, it includes rights, duties, privileges, liberties, as well as social security benefits. Now, is employment generation the only duty of the government? Then the answer is no. But is it the duty of the government, or perhaps one of the duties of the government? The answer is yes. Now, to address your question specifically, does the budget 2021 solve the problem of unemployment? To my mind, personally, this is my opinion. There is not a single scheme which addresses unemployment. However, there are number of schemes through which the government seeks to generate employment. That is one part of looking at the budget. The other aspect of looking at the budget is to simply try and understand what the Prime Minister himself says. So he says minimum government, maximum governance. Minimum government is a neoliberal theory of state. Excuse me for that. Neoliberals always believe that state intervention is inimical to the progress of the individual and therefore to the progress of the society as a whole. So the government basically has no business being in the business. So that is one way of looking at it. And the third aspect of your question is, how does the government deal with people who are already employed? So there is a public sector unit, let's say for example unit XYZ. So the government wants to privatize that as well. So the government really does not want to take any employment generation activities, rather it wants to be a facilitator, and therefore there are number of schemes. For example, the MSME sector is given a lot of boost, tax subsidies are given down, then there are the government is proactively trying, and through RBI the government has been requesting the banks to be as liberal as possible as far as giving out loans to priority sector is concerned. Therefore the government through its budget, especially since 2014, has actually limited its role of creating employment. Rather, through its annual budgets, the government is trying to facilitate employment generation, not by its means or channels, but it wants to create entrepreneurs and not people who are looking for jobs. So I hope that I have addressed your question sufficiently. Another question is, what is social budget? Well, there are a number of different types of budget. For example, there is a zero-based budget, there is a recurring budget, there is a budget called a social budget. So what social budget simply means is, in a democracy, resources are equitably owned and therefore their utility must be equitable as well. So social goods such as security, social security, unemployment allowances, then allowances for lactating mothers, allowances for expectant mothers, allowances for the destitutes, allowances for the unemployed, and so on and so forth should be the prerogative of the government. And when the government introduces a budget which takes care of the social security and has a determined understanding or a definite understanding of the social concerns in the nation, then that budget is termed as a social budget. But social budget, but this let me also make it very clear that this is one aspect of social budget. Social budget can be differently looked at. For example, there are concerns about gender inequality, and votaries, especially of the feminist movements, have been calling for gender equality. Therefore, there is a new concept called as gender budgeting. And in 2019 and 2020, the government has very specifically said that we are coming out with gender budgeting. So what are some of the schemes? Say for example, Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana. That is one scheme which has addressed the issue of gender inequality. Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, the houses, which is an affordable housing scheme. The houses are registered or booked in the name of an adult woman within the family. Manrega, every year there are allocations made to Manrega, but 1/3 of all the work jobs are reserved for women. So those type of budgets which address social concerns are known as social budgets. So I think I have addressed that question as well. What rules of procedure would you be following in Lok Sabha at PCGT NYP? Well, we will be following Lok Sabha conduct of business rules, and those rules will be provided by the executive board. How can a common man give their inputs on budget? Now, this is a very important question to my personal understanding. What can a common man do as far as giving his opinions or beliefs on the budget is concerned? So the government of India has been making efforts to reach out to maximum population, and in its quest to do that, the government has launched a portal called as mygov.in, mygovernment.in. So you can simply log into that portal, create your account, log into it, and there are number of different activities in which you can participate. Once you create your personalized account, you can participate in number of different competitions, in activities, and you can share your ideas including on schemes, policies, programs, implementation. So I would recommend you to go through that particular portal, which is mygov.in, mygovernment.in, so to say. Create your personalized account and then try and give your suggestions on different aspects of policy programs. The government is more than open and it is more than willing to welcome those suggestions. They look into it and you get a response for what you have suggested. So it is not that the government is not conscious of what is happening or what people want. So my answer would be yes, you can participate in it, and the way to do it is to create your personalized account. What it takes is not more than 5 minutes, a good internet connection, and a computer or a mobile phone or a laptop which supports a particular type of let's say for example a browser, a search engine. Just type in mygov.in and you will be able to give your suggestions. Could you briefly state the stages and substages again? I think I have answered that question. Another, do we have any more questions coming in? Is it possible? I'll just take care of. Is it true that the officials involved in printing the budget are kept under a lockdown till the day the budget is presented? Where are they locked down and who are those officials? Okay, now this is an interesting fact and it does happen, but that doesn't mean that they are kept in a lockdown. Basically, the reason before doing it, first things first is, does it actually happen that officials involved in enactment of the budget are actually asked to leave away from their families? They are made to they are actually given different provisions. They have to live very differently, and the answer is true. Yes, that happens. Some of the high officials in the government of India to the rank of secretary are actually involved in this budget process. The finance secretary is drawn from the Indian Administrative Service, but other members, additional secretary, joint secretary, could be members of the esteemed Indian Revenue Service, IRS. So even those members working at the secretary level to the government of India, along with them some members of the Niti Aayog, and apart from that members who are working in the budget division of the Department of Economic Affairs under the Ministry of Finance, who are engaged in the actual enactment, are expected, they are actually served an oath to keep secrecy of what they are doing, and to ensure that secrecy, they are actually allowed to stay differently away from their families. And that happens not for a longer duration of time, but actually that happens for about 15 to 20 days before the budget is actually presented, because printing the budget is the final stage in its enactment process. Until then things keep changing, so you never know what can change and what can't. But after the budget has been finalized by the finance minister, and after she has given or he has given his or her approval for printing the budget, from that very day the officials are expected to remain stay put in the finance ministry. They can't leave their offices, although there are provisions of food and accommodation which are arranged by the government of India for them, and their telephone lines don't work. And yes, that happens, but that happens only for about 15 to 20 days. And where are the lockdown? Yes, they are given accommodation in the government facilities. It could be a hotel or it could be a government bungalow. So that doesn't it is always those accommodations also keep changing. The reason for doing it is in 1993 the budget document was leaked, and since then this provision has been strictly followed. So yes, that does happen, but you don't call it lockdown. Those are actually measures which are taken by the government to ensure secrecy of the document. So yes, that does happen. Good question, by the way. Is it possible that railways as an industry could also be privatized someday? The government has actually come up with proposals. The Niti Aayog has come out with proposals to privatize some railway lines, some routes. For example, from Pune to Patna has to be privatized. Delhi to Allahabad, Mumbai to Delhi has to be privatized. Then from Kolkata to Hyderabad has to be privatized. Hyderabad to Chennai and Chennai to Bangalore is to be privatized. So the government has, the Niti Aayog has actually come out with a vision document regarding the privatization of railways. And and some of you might know, or some of you may not be aware of the fact that IRCTC, which is a very famous government service, is actually not a government service. It is a private service. IRCTC is a private service. So privatization has happened over a period of time, but this government is pushing towards extreme privatization. What I mean by extreme is they are trying to privatize routes, they are trying to privatize signaling, they are trying to privatize train, that is your locomotives, as well as your carts. They are trying to privatize other aspects like drivers. They are trying to privatize other even more aspects like pantry, for example, sanitary services, and so on and so forth. So is it possible that railways as an industry could also be privatized? The answer, it is already privatized to some extent. Although railways is considered to be a strategic sector of the government, therefore the government will never privatize it completely, but to some extent, yes. And has it already happened? Then again the answer is yes. uh, I would want to ask that how can the increase in the price of petrol actually help us as citizens? If there are people who are paying tax already, isn't this unfair? Well, I think the question is addressed in a wrong domain. What determines the prices of petrol is a different subject altogether. In India, India is not a petroleum production country. So we import what is called as crude oil. From where do we import that crude oil? We import from Dubai market. That market is called as Brent market. So prices are set by countries who are in the process of production and exports. Those countries have a forum of their own. They are called as OPEC, oil and petroleum exporting countries. So they will determine the prices on per barrel basis. At the moment, the prices are somewhere between $50 and $55 per barrel. When the raw crude comes into India, our oil industries, say for example OIL, Oil India Limited. So Oil India Limited will be in the process of refining those crude oil and making byproducts like petrol, diesel, rubber, plastic, and so on and so forth. Therefore, there is a price attached to it. The point is, why is the price not going down? So there are international compulsions of the government. That is one part. The other part, or the other aspect, is because of the COVID-19, the government has actually lost a lot of revenue sources. So in order to come up with that revenue aspect, since oil and petrol industry is not already a part of the GST regime, but it contributes as much as 20% to our economy, therefore the prices of the petroleum product at this particular stage have skyrocketed. But that doesn't mean that they won't come down. Perhaps in about 15-20 days or even a couple of months time, we'll have to wait and see. We can't speculate, but we can't also sit down with our relaxed atmosphere. The point is, we'll have to wait, because this is a government decision and there is a lot of critical components which are at play, and they are at absolute interdependence. So this cannot be treated as an aspect in isolation. So we'll have to wait and watch what the government wants to do about it. So why is the railway budget now merged with the union budget? Okay. So the railway budget and union budget, when the budget was first introduced in 1860 in India, it was called as a union budget. In 1924, after the Ackworth Committee recommendations, railway budget and union budget were separated. That continued for 92 years until 2016. In 2016, the government of India sat a committee under the chairmanship of Dr. Vivek Debroy. So he recommended that the budgets should be merged. There is no need for a separate railway budget. Now, in the first place, in 1924, why was that done? The reason is India was still under the colonial rule of the British Empire, and much of our production had collapsed by then. 82% of all the budgetary allocations were made only and only on transport sector, of which railway comprised 78% of budget allocations. 78% of budget allocations were made only on one component called as the railways, and therefore in 1924 union budget was separated from the railway budget. But in 2017 that was no longer necessary. Why? Because the allocations to the railways had come down to less than about 4 or 5% of the actual budget, less than 4 to 5%, from 78% in 1924 to less than 4 to 5% in 2016. So you can understand that the economy has expanded. So the question now is, why was it merged? So there are three aspects to it. Number one, different budgets means different days to be finalized, different procedures to be followed, and more allocations. It includes a lot of administrative cost. This was one aspect. The other aspect was railways today. Even today, railway is not suffering from losses. Many people have a misconception that Indian Railways is suffering from losses. The fact is no. Indian Railways is not suffering from losses. But if you actually look into some of the data which is available on the Railway Ministry's website, you will see for every 98 rupees and 97 paisa spent, the government is making only 1 rupee. So the profit margin has come down. So it was observed and it was believed by experts in the Niti Aayog as well as in the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, which is headed by the Prime Minister himself, but he is also given economic advices by a vice chairman, and that vice chairman happened to be Dr. Vivek Debroy. So in his wisdom, he believed that the only way to increase service and to improve profit margins of the railways would be to merge the budgets. So on the one hand, two different budgets means allocations are done separately, concerns are handled separately, and there is no communication happening between the two ministries. Also, if there is a shortfall in the revenues of the railway ministry, the finance ministry, since the budget doesn't address those concerns, will have very little scope to address those revenue concerns and those revenue shortfalls of the budget of the railway ministry. Therefore, there were a number of considerations which were taken into account, and after factoring in all the possible scenarios, it was finally decided that we'll revise the system back and go back to the 1860 format. And that is why since 2017 we have a single composite budget which includes provisions for railways therein. So it includes policies on routes, it includes policies on privatization of assets of the railways, it includes matters relating to the pricing of railways, it includes purchasing of raw materials, it also includes exporting of automotives in railway automotives, so to say, or locomotives, which is in general parlance called as the engines. So everything from import, processing, manufacturing, export, pricing, and so on and so forth, everything is now taken care by a composite budget called the union budget. So I guess I have answered that question as well. Will the privatization of public sector banks announced in budget 2021 be beneficial to the common man? Well, again, okay, on FRBM Act, fine. Privatization of PSBs. So public sector banks are basically banks which are under the control of the government of India. Now take this statement in a different perspective. The banks are under the control of the government of India, or in some cases the government of a particular state. Now there has been a privatization spree. This government believes that the government has no business being in the business. Therefore, what it believes is we must privatize those assets which are no longer going to yield any tangible results for the government. Efficiency has come down. They are no longer competitive in the global market. They are unable to compete even with the Indian private sector. Their loan structures are heavily outdated. They are unable to attract members. They are unable to attract depositors. Investments have dried out. And taking all these aspects into consideration, the government has very straightforwardly considered an option which is called as privatization. Now, will privatization be beneficial to common man? Now we'll have to understand this in a broader perspective. How many banks have been privatized so far? A lot many, to be honest. But will it benefit a common man? Then I believe to some we'll have to have a fine balance between both the arguments, whether it is a good move or a bad move, because a lot happens between the gray. Things don't work in a black and white scenario. So the first particular thing why that could possibly work is because customers will get proper services, or in other term, what we can say is there would be more facilities. In some public sector banks, even core banking solutions, CBS, even that has not been implemented so far. The softwares which they are using are outdated. They are from the socialist era. People who are working in those banks are actually elderly people. They are unable to take those risks of re-educating themselves and migrating from the pustakalay to dastakalay to what is called as the digital spree of the government or the digital India program. So they are unable to migrate to a new system altogether. And that is another aspect where I believe that privatization should help, that it can actually help in another vision of the government. Through privatization and digitization, the government is also ensuring what is called as financial autonomy of the banks. So the government no longer feels it necessary to actually look after the affairs of these banks. So they do want private sector to come in. It had happened in 1969, 1972, as well as in 1980, that number of different banks were actually nationalized by governments of the day. But today this government believes in privatization. Why? Because as I've said, that they believe in financial autonomy. They want people to get more services. They want to attract more customers. They want Indian banks to become, and there has been number of reports. Some of them are lying before the parliament. Some of them are published by the Ministry of Finance. Some of them have been published by the Niti Aayog. Even in 2017, the Niti Aayog came out with a vision document which is very well specified that there is a need for us to privatize banks. Why? Because not a single bank apart from the State Bank of India is globally competent. The State Bank of India is the 55th largest bank in the world. But apart from the State Bank of India, not a single bank has been able to match the potential of being a global bank. Let's say, for example, ICICI. Recently, it closed its branches even in Sri Lanka. So we can actually imagine why the government is actually thinking of privatizing banks, because they believe that the government cannot facilitate the requirements of the people. On the contrary, if we rope in private sector, they will be able to facilitate and they will be able to improve the infrastructure of the banking sector in India. Besides, it has a lot of things to do with the government's vision of financial literacy, financial education, and therefore the government has launched a number of strategies as well. In 2019, the government launched what is known as National Strategy for Financial Education, and for that, privatization has been considered as one essential factor. There we have heard of people who are called as bank mitras, and there have been schemes like Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. So the government really believes that privatization will actually rope in more people. It will allow banks to expand their networks, and some of these banks, owing to their new technology, innovative solutions, core banking facilities, personalized services, but more importantly discipline which has been lacking in the public sector banks, some of these banks can really make it big and become global players in their own way. So this has been the vision of the government. Although it's a vision, we'll have to wait, because only time has the power to answer that particular question. Is it beneficial to a common man? So the fact is, we are not losing our bank accounts, we are not going to lose our deposits. So as such, it is not going to affect commoners in any which way. The point is, how does the economy react to it? And for that, we'll have to wait and see, because some of the banks have been privatized, some of the banks have been merged. So there have been mergers as well. For example, Dena Bank, Vijaya Bank, they of late in 2018, I suppose, three of the banks were merged by the central government. Now there have been talks about Punjab National Bank being merged into some other bank. So the government is actually trying not only to privatize but also to merge these banks, so that they can become bigger in their own ways, and they can facilitate more services, accommodate more customers, become profitable themselves, and they should be in a way able to compete with foreign banks. For example, we have HSBC, no competition. We have Deutsche Bank, no competition. We have Bank of New York and Mellon, no competition. So these are global banks. They are operating in India. But what do we have in exchange? We have only one SBI. And that is not enough. And therefore, the government believes that instead of the government trying to push the banks to perform better, banks would automatically function well if the bureaucracy in the government is removed and instead those banks are privatized. So that is the vision of the government. And therefore, how does the economy react to it is a larger question rather than whether it benefits a common man or not. But it has been seen generally that private sector has been able to provide more benefits and better service than the government itself, because the government has social welfare considerations, for example subsidies, for example free food, ration are some of the welfare approaches of the government. But the private sector has been able to attract more people because the middle class in India is on a rise. We are becoming more open, our trade is increasing, and therefore people are no longer looking for some kind of an account, rather they are expecting better services, and that is defined by the corporate world in terms of customer satisfaction. And therefore if that is what you are actually asking for, or if that is what you are actually wanting me to suggest, that whether people would benefit, then I would say it depends on customer satisfaction, and private sector it does have what it requires to provide facilities and services to the people. But the larger question again is, how does the economy react to it? And for that we'll have to wait and watch. Could you please elaborate on the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act? Okay, fine. We'll take this question as well. So Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management is an act of the Parliament of India. It was enacted in year 2003. The background of enacting this act is the rising public debt which was seen at that point of time. India became a liberalized, globalized and privatized economy in the 1990s, and we are all aware of the historic 1991 budget. In 1997, Dr. P. Chidambaram came up with his budget. The media termed it as the dream budget. So there were two different budgets in a very short span of time, which pushed liberalization, which pushed privatization, and as a result, the government of India was able to achieve more and more loans, more and more grants from external agencies like World Bank, IMF. At that point in time, there were countries like Japan, France. They gave a lot of loan to India. Even today, if you look at smart cities, of the 100 smart cities, 86 of them have been financed by around 15-16 different countries. The bullet train, for example, is financed by JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency, again a financial arm of the Japanese government. ISRO has been looking for money through its arm called as Antriksh. The NASA has actually been very interested in giving some budgetary allocations to ISRO through its own private channels. Therefore what it means is the government has been accumulating a lot of debt. At that point in time it was necessary, maybe today not that much. Today we have a private sector, we have banking, we have expanded our financial network, and we are in a much more better position. So if you ask me what is the public debt today, India is perhaps the largest economy with the safest possible road ahead, and that is 19% as a percentage of GDP. No other country as big as India has been able to manage its debt less than 30%. If you look at China, around 38%, US 42%. US economy is around $19 trillion. Its public debt, or its exports, its import deficit is around $19 trillion. So you can imagine that most of the countries have borrowed loans and they are unable to pay it. But in India, that was not to be the case. So in 2003, the Parliament took a very historic decision. They came out with a law, and that law came to be known as Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. So what does these terms mean in specific? The first term is fiscal responsibility. Fiscal responsibility is the responsibility of the government. Monetary responsibility is the responsibility of the RBI. So it is the responsibility of the government to ensure that its budgetary provisions, which includes borrowings, so at times it could be market borrowing. Market borrowing means the government can borrow from private sector existing in India, or it could be external commercial borrowings, that is ECB. So the government can borrow from external sources. Let's say for example IMF, World Bank, BRICS Bank, New Development Bank, NDB, Asian Development Bank. There could be US, Japan, France, or any third country which can finance a particular project in India. So for that, the government is allowed to borrow from the external markets. However, there has to be a limit to how much it can borrow in a particular financial year, and that limit was set. That limit actually was adopted in such a way by 2019. It was decided that the public debt of the government, or what is known as the revenue deficit, should come down to 0%. However, that has been pushed indefinitely. Along with it, the act also requires the finance minister to present some documents to the parliament in a quarterly manner. So in every session, the finance minister direct taxes basically, and apart from it, there are some documents which will highlight the vision of the government on specific situations. Let's say, for example, the FRBM Act mandates the government to come out with a medium-term fiscal policy strategy, with fiscal policy statement, with macroeconomic statement, and so on and so forth. So on a whole, the FRBM Act enacted in 2003 has been largely responsible to actually keep the public debt under control. At this point in time, it has risen up to around 19.6 or 19.7%. At any given point in time, states cannot cross the mark of 5% at this point, but actually it has been set to 3% of state GDP. At the national level too, it was set to 3%, but more or less that is never followed, because we are a developing country and we have more expenditure than the sources of revenues, and therefore to match those mismatches, we need to borrow more, and in that the amount or the target which has been fixed by the FRBM is often breached. But does this mean that we are a country which has sunk into public debt? The answer is no. It is actually very low at 19%, and we have foreign forex reserves or foreign exchange reserves to a tune of $575 billion, which can cushion up to 13 months of our imports. So what it means is our macroeconomic framework is pretty solid. We are in a good financial position to deal with any financial stress. At this point, the economy is not doing well, and therefore the FRBM Act, in my personal opinion, should be suspended, let's say for example for 2 to 3 years at least, and then maybe after the economy has recovered, we can actually set new targets. But I believe I've answered that or I've done justice to that question. Oh, thank you, Ishita. Thank you so much. Okay. HRD 22611. Thank you so much. Excellent speech. Then Shahasab. Thank you. Thank you so much, Shahasab. I am sorry if I have mispronounced your name. Any important things to keep in mind considering PCGT NYP is the first conference to keep union budget as agenda? Addressing you then. So for time being, I'll urge you to hold your horses. Although it's a good question that you do want to remain prepared and in time. So what I can suggest at this point in time is, even I do not have the study guides with me. So it is better that I suggest only one thing, which is keep your eyes open, keep your mind open, and read as much as possible. Read on important issues, read on different programs. If you have already gotten your portfolio, then try to figure out what you have done in the parliament, and that should pretty much be it. But I'll be addressing this question at a later stage with a different video, but for that we'll have to wait for some time. Nicely explained, Roy Arhana. Thank you so much, Roy. Good platform for learning of everyone. Of course it is. So should I expect any more questions, or should we just wrap this up? Well commend session. Well, thank you, HDR. Thank you. One of the most informative sessions. Oh, thank you, Shah Sahib. Shah Sahib, I think that's how it goes. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have come to the end of the session. And yeah, thank you, Ayush, thank you, Bianca. So I'll just end this session here. I hope this was informative. My quest, honestly and very sincerely, was to go through the complex process which is involved in budget preparation and budget enactment and getting it passed through the parliament in simplest possible terms. I do realize that everything was not well explained, because there is a limitation to what and how much one can explain through a conference, through Instagram or any other social media platform. So I beg your pardon for that. If I have made any mistakes, you are free to highlight those mistakes. And it is possible that I must have made one or two mistakes, but I'll definitely improve on them. And if you still have any feedbacks, good, bad, ugly, any comments, suggestions, please pitch in. We'll wait for another couple of minutes, and if nothing comes up, we'll just wrap it. So I'll give you another 15-20 seconds. If you have any suggestions, please wave in, and then we'll continue for 2 more minutes if necessary. Thank you, Shreya. Thank you so much, Vibale 9999. Thank you, everybody. You have been fantastic audience. Thank you, Bianca. Thank you so much. All right. So I think we have exhausted 15-20 seconds already. Since there are no more questions and it is already 9 in the night, so I'll wish you a good night. Take care.